Hello, Internet. Thank you once again for joining me to talk all things vertical drama. I'm very happy because I have found the actor behind one of my most favourite iconic roles in vertical drama, which is Wyatt in the independent vertical Pizza Guys versus Vampires. And that is the amazing John Druska, who is here to tell us all about himself and answer my many, many questions. So, John, over to you. Let's do your intro to the internet.
Sure. Okay. Well, my name's John Druska. I'm an actor in Los Angeles. Grew up in Chicago and bounced around the Midwest of the United States a little bit, and been an actor for going on almost 20 years. A lot of comedy background and a few credits here and there, and a few legendary stories to tell along the way. But I'm happy to be here. And Pizza Guys versus Vampires was my to-date first and only vertical.
Very good intro. Okay, so working actor, LA, any particular jobs you really want to talk about that were like, these are great ones that people should go and look at? Because I think this will bring in some new people who won't have met you before. So what should they go and watch in your back catalogue? What are your favourite parts?
Sure, I've got a couple appearances. There's a show called All American, which is about high school football players, which I, never was and couldn't realistically portray at this point in my life. But I'm in a season 4 episode, which was a lot of fun to film, and it was dramatic, I guess you could say. I got to play kind of a scummy landlord who kind of gets my comeuppance. So that was a good role. I was also on Call Me Kat, which was a sitcom on Fox with Mayim Bialik, who was first notable here in the States on a show called Blossom back in the day. But,
That was my childhood. Sorry.
Okay. Well, she's wonderful. She produced that show as well, and I got to chat with her personally as well. So, a few episodes of TV here and there. And then, I'm not on the show, but I'm very proud of the fact that some years ago, I was flown out to New York to Studio 8H, where I got to test for Saturday Night Live. My background is in that world and in sketch comedy. And if you're doing sketch, wherever in Chicago or New York or LA, that's really kind of about as high as you can go, is an opportunity to be on SNL. So I'm glad I got to do that some years ago.
Yeah, that's peak because it's one of those things that's global.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so vertical dramas, mobisodes, verticals.
Let's talk about it.
When did it enter your consciousness? What was your first?
I was at a film festival, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so ago. And one of the entries was like the first 20, maybe the first 15 or so episodes of a vertical. And so that was interesting just because you're in a movie theater screening room. And, obviously when you see a vertical on a screen, there's all that black space. So, visually it was frankly not like anything else I'd ever seen. But that's when I kind of caught wind of it. And there was a little Q&A afterwards. And I learned a little bit about that. And really kind of coinciding with my involvement with Pizza Guys versus Vampires is when I began to notice some headlines, in some of the trades and just some news here and there and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's because I was just more aware of it because of Pizza Guys. Like when you buy a new car, you suddenly see your car all over the road, or if it just so happens that it's now sort of blowing up in the the US consciousness or the Hollywood showbiz consciousness. But I've been, vaguely aware of the concept for about 6 months.
So, were you connected with any of the team at Flashback Pictures before, who were the production company behind it?
Yeah. So Dan Catronio is the head of Flashback, and Dom Russo, who co-created the sitcom Workaholics, which used to be on Comedy Central. I had worked with those guys years ago, over 10 years ago, on a web series we shot called Stuck, which was a lot of fun. So I, sort of kept up with them over the years. Dan was a DP at the time, a director of photography, and, Dom is still a writer and a director. And then we got together, we were having coffee one day with Matt Rainey, who wrote Pizza Guys, and I had nothing to do with the genesis of the idea, but I was there in the room when those guys sort of honed in on this concept and then kind of took it and ran with it. So I knew Dan and Dom for years, and Matt Matt I just met recently.
Can we say then that Wyatt was written for you?
We cannot say that, which is shocking in my opinion. So yeah, so Matt, didn't know me that well at the time. But when I read the script, it just felt really good. I felt really comfortable with the character. It was a lot of fun, very funny right off the page. And I asked Matt point blank, or I think I assumed, that he had written it for me. And he, very kindly clarified that that wasn't really the case. They did, offer me the role, and I think Dom and Dan probably helped kind of guide that casting decision a little bit. But no, I got lucky with great material and a great character on the page. So I had a lot to work with from the start.
At what stage you were brought in? And then when did you meet your co-stars?
Yeah, great question. So I know Toru Uchikado, who plays Kenji, is also a longtime friend and collaborator with Dan. So I think, again, I don't know that the role was written for Toru, but I know that, I think he was sort of the odds-on favorite to land it. And then, but I didn't know anybody on the cast until we had a Zoom table read about 2 weeks before filming began. So that's when I met Quarte Denaya, who plays Wendy. That's when I met Alan Smith, who plays Vasile, the big bad in Pizza Guys versus Vampires. And it was funny. After we shot is when we all started following each other on socials and that sort of thing. And Melanie Rains is another actress who portrays one of the vampires, and Fiction, who's a very accomplished dancer and stunt performer. I started following everybody and realized I'm the only person on this cast without like a black belt in some sort of martial art. Like everybody's a trained fighter. Toru studies, like, he's from Japan. He studies and practices like, ancient Japanese sword techniques. Like all these people are like lethal weapons, and I'm just not, so that was a fun realization. So in the aftermath of seeing people again and doing our screenings, our live screenings and that sort of thing, it's been fun to connect with people with a little bit more knowledge because, yeah, I was sort of thrown in with a crew of very talented actors, but people I was not, really familiar with when we started rolling the cameras.
So you said you had a table read. Just to explain to people, because I'm presuming it was a similar timetable to Immersive Verticals, how many days were you actually filming?
We filmed for 5 days, 5 consecutive days, and they were frankly pretty reasonable. I mean, I realized, I loved the program, or I loved the script, loved the project, and knew I was in good hands from the get-go. But like after the second day, I was like, wow, this is a really good production all the way across the board, because we weren't working like super late days. And, we were banging out a lot of different scenes. Most of it was shot in one location where we were able to isolate little rooms here and there to kind of shoot different sequences and that sort of thing. But photography was 5 days.
Amazing. Right. So I need to ask you about Wyatt. I have many questions.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. First of all, the car. Your car is awesome. Does the car actually go? You were able to drive it? Is it stick shift?
Yes and no. The car runs. The car does move. I did not drive it. I cannot drive stick shift. So we had to have a stunt driver come in and put on my shirt and put on my visor and handle that. So I do believe Toru was sitting shotgun for a few of those shots, or I should say passenger side. Shotgun might be an American slang term, but I never got to drive the thing, unfortunately.
Because obviously it's a brilliant thing of when you open that trunk as well, and just the randomness of what Wyatt has in there, which obviously turns out to be very useful. But
yeah. I had a hand in that. I'm a big fan of backgammon, so I made sure to sneak one of my backgammon sets in there. So that was a little taste of me that I slipped into Wyatt's backstory.
I think the thing I've realised I loved about Wyatt is that he's the eternal optimist, in that he does the work, but he's like, no, we're not looking down on this job. Because obviously I've gone on about it. I think it works on so many levels. Obviously you have this amazing monologue to your, your kind of rookie that you're trying to break in of like, you don't diss the pizza. This is actually the most important thing. But then you also compare it to Hollywood, and I love it because I think it's the perfect breakdown of the problem with movies. Too much Timothée Chalamet. Much as we love him, yes, too much Timothée Chalamet.
Yeah, there could be too much of a good thing. You could have too much ice cream.
Yeah. Was that your read of Wyatt as well? Because that was mine. That just, he's one of those, like, I'm just going to make the most of everything. He's just got this fantastic get on with it
Yeah, I don't think I really approached the character in terms of like, what is this guy's, worldview.
Mm,
I was concerned more with the night at hand.
mm,
We tell a story over the course of a night, and
mm,
certainly there was excitement and happiness and optimism that came to my attitude and sort
mm,
of my line delivery. But I appreciate you saying that because I didn't have enough time to really, dig into this guy and really consider his
mm,
entire backstory and that sort of thing. But I did know, I mean, just from the words on the page, I mean, as an actor, I always start with the text,
mm,
and the text informs my subtext.
mm,
And Kenji quite routinely has negative things to say about
mm,
me or about pizza or delivery. So my goal was to counter that with, yeah, with positivity and really with excitement and passion. I wanted to
mm.
make something that seemed very, average or kind of boring or rote, exciting and new and fresh and that sort of things. I agree with you that Wyatt is an optimist, but in truth, that didn't cross my mind at the time. So I really like the feedback.
So I have to ask you about some of my favourite scenes as well. So
Perfect.
obviously one of the first fight as such, when you're trying to deliver pizza and everyone's dead and then it turns out there's vampires there, I think no one will look at garlic baguettes again in the same way.
Yeah, our G sticks. Yeah.
The cheese sticks. It's even the fact that it's like, no, they're G sticks. How long did that take? And like, what was it like for you? Because you've got all these incredibly talented stunt performers, martial artists around you. And how does that work with you sort of mixing up with all of them?
I mean, I loved it. I think there was only one thing I didn't do, and which I'm glad I wouldn't have been willing to volunteer for. We had somebody step in and do a flip for my
Mm,
character in a later sequence. But yeah, that first fight between Kenji and the vampire, which is Fiction, the dancer,
mm,
and myself, I loved it. I mean, I would have gladly done more. I got whacked in the head with a garbage can lid and got kind of pinned, to a desk and, I'm almost about to get bit. So that was good. That was more kind of from a technical standpoint, that was more kind of grappling and that sort of thing and fairly easy to choreograph. We had a great action director who served as one of our camera operators as well. And he and Toru, who played Kenji, had worked on tons of stuff together in the
mm,
past. So again, it was a very well-run set, very safe. Nobody ever asked me to do anything that made me uncomfortable, and I would have been
mm,
willing to do much more. But again, you got to kind of leave the cooler stuff to the professionals. But that was fun, and I don't recall now. We may have shot portions of that over the course of 2 different days, but again, it wasn't particularly stressful. We got the shots, and obviously that most of it made it into the final cut, and it looks pretty great in my opinion.
And another thing I like about the script is that there's there's no loose words as such. So I like it in comedy, writing, whatever, when there's something which on its own is funny, but then comes back and is even better. So it's already funny when you're explaining, oh, I'm kind of qualified as a shaman and you did your online course, which is funny on so many levels because it just, yeah, anyway, I found that hilarious. It turns out to be very, very handy for when you're trying to deal with vampires and you're thinking, holy water. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. I love it so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, credit to Matt Rainey, the writer. I mean, it's and that's sort of whatever, that's kind of screenwriting 101. It's a bit of Chekhov's gun. You don't
Yeah.
see that samurai sword early and not expect it to come back and come in handy later. And the same thing with that. Again, because it could just be Wyatt kind of talking nonsense or
Mm.
hyping himself up, but then it does come back and it becomes relevant later on with our holy cola gag.
It's
Yeah, it's
brilliant.
a it's
Yeah.
a yeah, it's
You are battling with
a
that bottle as
multi-layered
well.
script. Yeah.
You
Sorry.
battle with the bottle a bit as well, I think, trying to get it
Yeah,
open.
yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I got to blast the camera with that bottle. Then we put a little
Oh,
screen over the lens and I got to spray it right in the camera. And the poor camera guy was wrapped up in plastic garbage bags to make sure he didn't get soaked too.
and then the other bit I really love for Wyatt is near the end when obviously you've got your showdown with the big bad and there's this thing, you have a very cool, iconic entrance, which is made funnier by the fact that the garage door, whatever it is so slow going up.
Yeah.
I think he checks his watch at one stage of like, is this going to happen?
I think that was an ad lib from Alan Smith, the
Oh,
actor.
was
I
it?
think
Yeah.
he suggested we throw that in there. Yeah, that was a great touch.
But that's kind of cool, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of the movie dream, isn't it? You've had some great dialogue and then you get to stand there and have like an epic hero's entrance, where you're backlit and you're there to deal with the vampires. I mean, I
It
kind of think
is,
that's as
yeah.
good as it gets, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I felt that way. Again, I felt that way, as I mentioned, on set. I just knew it was a good project and a well-run production. And in the
Yeah.
aftermath, looking back on it, it was definitely one of the best things I've ever done, just
Mm.
with the people that I got to work with, some of them again, how much fun it was. I mean, it's fun. I'm a comedy guy. It's fun to do comedy. It's more fun to like wrestle vampires, to be perfectly honest. And yeah, and I got some cinematic stuff. And, as an actor, I want to try and maintain authenticity and realism, but I also had to kind of do a little hero line. I had to tap into a little, Too Fast, Too Furious style of acting when I have my kind of one-liner, superhero movie type stuff. So it was fun to have fun. Let me put it that way. And again, it was a great script, very professional set, wonderful co-stars, and I'm very lucky as an actor to get a lot of, kind of standout moments, but it never felt like I was dominating, the set or taking other people's heat or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it was just a great, equal experience, working with all my co-stars.
Because it reminded me a little bit of Rush Hour.
Some folks had mentioned that on set.
Kind
Yeah.
of dynamic, isn't it? Of you've got the kind of the guy who isn't as good at the martial arts, whatever, but is the quick thinking kind of mouth of the piece, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yeah.
And then and then the guy who's like, I can do all the action, but the way they interact as well and kind of lift each other up and stuff. I just thought it was really fun dynamic and something I know a lot of Vertical fans have wanted to see, because often it's we've been quite stuck in a certain storyline. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was bandied about on set a few times. And I also, my favorite movie of all time is Ghostbusters. And there's a few sequences. And again, this is what's cool about any acting or any production. I didn't sense this on set, but before that first big fight, when we're kind of inching through the crime scene in post-production, they added, some little musical elements that were kind of spooky. And it really reminded me of Ghostbusters when they're like in the hotel kind of early in the movie. And it just felt really cool. It kind of warmed my heart to emulate, my favorite film a little bit too.
Apart from the scenes I've mentioned, is there any other favourite scene that you had that was one you really liked?
Let's see. I loved that fight scene. I think that's probably it. I mean, I also liked the very end, which was the first thing we shot together. The sort of the climactic, victorious handshake, and that's actually something that didn't make the final cut. Kenji and Wyatt throughout the show. I don't know. What do I call it? The vertical? The vertical. Anyway, throughout the vertical, there was a few times where we try to do like a real cool handshake and we mess it up and it's sloppy or it doesn't work. So at the end, that was supposed to really be, a conclusion of sorts. But I think my favorite scene is the fight with Fiction. It was just too cool. And then even, as Kenji's about to get eaten, I try to throw a breadstick to him and I completely miss. And, that was sort of that was a bit of an ad lib on my part. And I really liked that. So to have a pretty intense scene that's like almost borderline violent, but still have the freedom and the encouragement from the production team to interject a little levity into that. It's a great memory. The gag worked out well in the finished product. And again, it's just a reminder of what a great creative set we had. I really felt welcome and encouraged to add my own aspects. And there was a really healthy dialogue back and forth. If something didn't quite work, they'd let you know. And that was kind of that. And there was no hard feelings. But yeah, that fight with Fiction really takes the cake, in my opinion.
Just talking briefly just about the vertical format, were there any adjustments that you realised you had to make, just for the fact that obviously that screen is that different, and obviously I'm told it's often a lot closer, It's a lot more in your face.
Yeah, for me personally, I can really think of just one or two specific times where, like, yeah, we had to get very, very close. And that happens a lot in acting. You're closer to people than you would ever really be. So in verticals, it's like really kind of strange. But I remember Toru saying we had a live Q&A up in Oakland, California a week or two ago.
Mm.
He said it did affect his execution of some of his sword work because he's got this extra, appendage that he wants to fit into frame, and he's got to
Mm.
make work and all that. And it's especially moving it from one side of frame to the other. So I do think it's worth noting that, yeah, with more motion and more action sequences, there's an added layer of challenge to the camera side of things. But it's so funny, until he mentioned that, it didn't even cross my mind. I had watched our vertical 3 or 4 times and kind of assumed everybody's experience was similar to mine, that it wasn't very different from an acting standpoint. But when you're doing action, it really does matter. So it'd be interesting to see or to hear other people's thoughts on that. If there is more, action or horror elements or kinetic movement
Yeah.
in verticals, moving forward.
Yeah, I think someone else has mentioned that as well. But yeah, I hadn't thought of it as well until they said it about, but no, but if you're extending something out, that's not going
Yeah.
to be in frame. But that's how quite a lot of that sort of weapon
You
work
got to be
works.
careful with your props. You got to
Yeah.
have everything. Yeah.
So obviously you mentioned, obviously you finished filming this and then you had this live screening. What were the, I guess what was the feedback and reactions you got? Because that must be quite cool, just seeing how an audience responds and what bits they
Yeah,
like.
it was great. I had watched it the night before, on my phone personally, and was really stoked, really blown away. It exceeded my expectations, which were already pretty high. But it was great doing the live screening. Of course, we had some pizza there, and yeah, it's always great. I've been in a movie theater here and there, and watched myself and felt the audience's reactions. Yeah, we got laughs in most of the places we expected them. We got laughs in a few places we didn't. I think some people were really, when we finally reveal that we're dealing with vampires and we really lean all into the horror aspect, that affected some people. I was sitting in front of some people who were like, so yeah, it's great. It was awesome. And I should count myself lucky, because I don't know. I feel like most verticals don't get that experience. They go straight to mobile or streaming or what have you, and they don't get that live showcase treatment. So it was fantastic. It was great.
Have you noticed an uptake of just people like, oh, you filmed a vertical? That's interesting. Because it does seem to be every day now there's new press articles coming out about verticals.
Right. Yeah. Well, my friends, many of whom work in the industry, are obviously curious just because they're seeing my social media posts and that sort of thing. And many of them are familiar with the concept as well, but they don't have such a firsthand, connection or source of knowledge about it. In terms of, kind of outside interest, I have connected with a few filmmakers who appreciated my performance and want to potentially work with me on their stuff as well. And we've gotten, some high praise online from a few reviewers and that sort of thing who specialize in verticals. I myself have gotten some correspondence from other creators. It hasn't been quite so vertically focused, but knowing now what can be done with the genre and with the format, I'm obviously very open to, anything, to more and to see what else is out there.
Do you write as well? Are you writing? Because obviously you've got this comedy background.
I do. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm a pretty prolific screenwriter. Like I said, I've been in Los Angeles here for, 18 years, and I've got probably 15 feature film scripts that I've written. I wrote a sitcom about a bowling alley that I am really proud of. I've actually written 2 traditional seasons of that, so I have about 660 pages. And that's another thing I do. Kind of started out as a hobby and a creative outlet, because I don't need anybody but myself to write. But now that's another aspect of my path through show business that I'm pursuing to hopefully turn into a career.
Because I was just thinking, with someone with that comedy background, it's something that I think the sort of traditional vertical, and obviously the fact that a lot of it's come over from China, has been really nervous about bringing comedy in. Because I think the belief is, well, it works on the system if you've got to get past a paywall. Is comedy going to be enough to do that? I think that's been the nerves, and it's like it needs to be high drama, and you need to know. But I've always thought comedy would work perfectly. I guess I'm trying to ask, like, is you seeing potential of the way that you could take those more traditional comedy skills and apply it also to the vertical format, in particular the episode cuts and the fact you need to keep that momentum going all the time?
Yes, I've thought of it, and I had an acting teacher named Stan Kirsch who said, at the heart of comedy is stakes. It's taking, the characters take things very seriously, and the comedy can derive from the fact that what they're taking seriously isn't serious. But if the performance, telegraphs the stakes, the personal investment, that matters. So the idea that, short little bites of content, with nonstop conflict, that tend to end in a cliffhanger and that are building upwards and upwards and upwards towards something deeply important and a big sort of climax, that's comedy. It's setup and punchline, so long form, over the course of an hour of vertical content, or just one episode at a time. Yeah, I think comedy has, dare I say, more potential to hook people and keep people interested. Than some of the other tropes that are kind of out there or are kind of defining verticals at the moment.
Also, the main thing about verticals has always been it delivers a dopamine hit, and I think we find comedy also delivers that feel good dopamine. I'm so
Yeah, yeah.
comedy. So
And
that's why.
especially because you could have an episode that's funny, 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 and then whoa, hold on, what? And then something serious happens, and there's a cliffhanger, and I just think the trigger in the brain is like, what? Well, what was it? Show me what's next. So
Right, watch this space. More to come. Final question. Do you think we can get a sequel to Pizza Guys? I mean, it's set up, isn't it? It's set up for a sequel.
Yeah, that's not my call, but I do think, I know we want to, and I do think we're kind of going that way. Toru, who played Kenji, is from Japan, and Dan of Flashback Pictures knows a thing or two about Japan. So I don't know, Pizza Guys versus Samurais, maybe.
Yes, come on, we've just done the pitch.
Maybe.
Internet, we need
I don't know. But yeah, I think we'd like to, and the reality of that remains to be seen. Again, it was just such a great production. I'm sure everybody who was involved would love to be on board again. I know I would.
It feels like it's just the beginning. I mean, that was basically just the duo coming together, wasn't it? And now we need your adventures of
Right, yeah.
so much more. Okay, I have to end with two important questions. Okay. Pizza. What's your favorite pizza?
Favorite toppings? Sausage and mushroom. This could be a long conversation, though, because one thing I didn't mention, I'll keep it short. One thing I didn't mention is that I'm from Chicago, and that in and of itself doesn't mean anything. You can be from anywhere and love pizza, but my dad made pizza. My mom would make the dough, and my dad would make the pizza.
Okay.
So I come from a long line of pizza aficionados. I make my own, and I definitely brought that to the character of Wyatt. But my favorite toppings are Chicago style, square cut, tavern cut sausage and mushroom.
What happens if I say pineapple on pizza? What do you do?
I'm all for it. For it.
You're right.
Yeah, people who gatekeep pizza and tell other people how to eat pizza can get the hell out of here. Unless people are adding poison to pizza, then you can step in.
Okay, I like that. That's where your line is.
Yeah.
As long as it's keeping you alive. Okay, and then I have to ask now about, because obviously it's pizza, but then also vampires. So what are your favourite on-screen vampires, movies or film?
I mean, great
movies or
question.
TV?
I gotta say Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's Dracula, 92, Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, Blade is a very fun movie too. Donald Logue is in Blade. That's an actor I've always admired. Stephen Dorff is pretty great in that movie. So Blade's good, but yeah, the 92 Dracula was great. And they shot that all, I believe, practically. They had miniatures for the train scenes and things along those lines. And Gary Oldman, kind of doesn't miss. He's great in everything. So that's my vote.
So I thought these were appropriate questions to end on. I just want to say thank you so much for just sharing a little bit more of behind the scenes of making it. And I want the sequel. I want there to be lots more. So thank you for helping me do my little pitch on the internet for the sequel.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.